efficiencies. And today we've got a few things from our partner world. And our first off the ranks is Damien DeGouveia from Cohesive to talk to us a little bit about alleviating some of those downtime pressures and operational pressures during those upgrades of Maximo. So, Damien, welcome.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it. So, as we mentioned, we're Cohesive. Some of you might say that we're new in town, but we have been around town for quite some time. Myself personally, originally from South Africa, now currently working in London. And so what we've tried to do as Cohesive, we were one of the big business partners, is in preparation for the end of support and this whole phase that we've gone through, transitioning from 7.6, from JVMs all the way through to OpenShift, we wanted to get a bit smarter with how we do our upgrades. Now, typically, when we're performing an upgrade, there's various considerations and processes that you would need to conduct. So first, let's assume you're on 7.6 or something earlier. We'll start off with just assessing to see how your licenses are going to convert, but simultaneously, how can you get a little bit more optimization? So this is the first step you would need to start to depart on. Once you perform this, it should also be good due diligence to see how you've actually configured your Maximo environment. Are there cron tasks that are running awry and going crazy, consuming additional resources? Have you really set things up in the most optimal way? So really just try to get a litmus test to see where you currently are. Then potentially it may also be good to determine how you've set up your environment technically. You know, do you have any SQL that hasn't been indexed? Are there any inefficient queries? When your users click save, do they sit there watching a spinning ball for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes? We've seen that before. So all of this needs to be taken into consideration. At the same time, we've also been given a plethora of new capabilities and functionalities within not just some of the earlier customers on early versions of 7, potentially looking at inspection forms, which might be new to some, potentially looking at reliability strategies within the Maximo application suite itself. So there's this big delta between what the business would like to have, what the business should need, and what the application suite can offer. And so really trying to figure out, where do we want to go? So really considering these 4 basic parts over here kind of set the stage in terms of what needs to happen and what do we want to happen. And ultimately, how can we align this towards the broader asset management strategy of the organization? So next up, we have to do some decision-making. And in this decision-making, we try to figure out what's the most appropriate upgrade methodology. And what I mean by this is, are we going to do a lift and shift? Take all the technical debt that we've accrued, chuck it over the fence, hope it sticks together, and plod on through, and potentially we can do some house cleaning when we have some free time, which might never happen, and then we complain again when the next upgrade has to come. The alternative, Greenfield implementation. We've had this come up once or twice, never actually been executed, but should we actually potentially start from scratch, a brand spanking new Maximo environment and just focus on data loads, and we get rid of all the customization, get rid of all the legacy stuff, clean sweep, stock standard, good to go. This is also a potential option we could do. Should we do a business enhancement upgrade? So this could potentially be, let's try and reduce some of our customizations whilst doing the technical upgrade. And so that would potentially reduce the risk of a technical upgrade in the first instance. And along with this, we have various factors to consider. So how are we also going to be conducting regression testing in our UAT? Are we going to do automation testing? Are we going to just do ye old way of putting things across? Data quality improvements. Some of the customers that we've started to engage with, when they want to move across the Maximo, there's maybe some legacy data they either want to just shove under the rug or potentially try to remap and clean. Cutover and planning. This is a very important one. We'll touch on that in a second. And then there's all sorts of things that kind of pertain to the technical aspects, OpenShift, Java customisations. How do we get away from those? How do we assess their impact? So there's really a lot to consider. Once we've done all of those considerations, we then go over and decide, well, which approach is most appropriate for the business? And typically what we do is we can present multiple options or scenarios to our customers and say, look, this is the technical lift and shift. It's going to be the cheapest. We can guarantee you that. If we maybe do technical lift and shift with a few reductions in customizations and cleaning and tweaking of these business critical areas that we've identified in the log analysis or in a health check, that would reduce risk. It'll be a little bit more expensive, but at least you're in a much better place. Or potentially we do a long-term roadmap where we can then identify and say, well, once we've done a technical lift and shift, phase 2 would then be to go and clean up some of the basics. And once we've cleaned up those basics, we can then start our journey along some of the other reliability-centered maintenance approaches, leveraging the AI assistant, and all sorts of other plethoras that come through after that. As a final output, what everyone would require in the ideal world is some kind of optimized license allocation, not just for your existing licenses, but also for the potential future. Because remember, we've done this business review, and we now know that maybe we want to explore health. Maybe we want to explore monitor. How will that impact our overall costing and licensing? Some of the mining customers I've worked for, it's a very precarious situation where you actually plan for death. In reality, that's very morbid, especially now. But mines have a set life. And so you may want to consider how your license allocation is going to pan out over a 5, 3, 10-year period, whatever the life of the mine is. Similarly, project planning costing, so that everyone kind of knows more or less when they're going to start sweating and costing how much they're going to be sweating. Infrastructure requirements, so this could either be in the form of, do you host on-prem, buy all the infrastructure yourself, kit up on OpenShift? Do you go IBM Cloud? Do you go third-party SaaS? Do you do something in between? All of those considerations. And then lastly, to try and really, and this is the most pertinent part, try and enhance this overall journey, because we want to, a phrase that we say, and it's got a funny ring to it, maximize Maximo, which it's very comical in some sense, but it is true, and it's something that we really need to do, because for the most part, we're paying a lot of money to have the same 7.6 on very shiny tin, and we need to justify that. So this is the realm that we all know and are gripping with. But out of all these things, I mean, we can spend a lot of time on license checks, we can do data quality improvements. All of these aspects over here, we can plan ahead of time for. But there's one portion of this whole process that really can bite you in the butt at some point, and that's the cutover and planning. So if we've spent a lot of time figuring out how we're going to deal with the customisations and interfaces, it's all fine. But if we don't get the cutover and planning right, which is usually over a weekend, maybe the Thursday even, we get started and pull through Monday morning, everyone caffeined up, crashing on the Monday, hoping and praying every single UAT covered all the test cases. If that doesn't happen correctly, all our work, all our planning goes down the drain. Roll back, start again. And so this is the solution or the problem that we try to resolve. So to understand this in a little bit more detail, for those of you who might not be aware, so the traditional approach that you would take is we have our existing Maximo instance, let's just call it production. We have users who are accessing it, work orders, service requests, doing their work, et cetera, et cetera. Then let's go and we set up a new Maximo application suite environment. We've got either, they don't have to be commissioned yet, but we've got a production test, development, whatever you want to put over there. What we'll do is we'll use the standard IBM migration scripts to take that existing production database and just create an initialization. So that's upgraded to mass, assuming all your customizations, everything works perfectly well. Once that's done, we'll then do our config, do our testing, et cetera, any changes, promote to test, promote to production. But then we also need to do this upgrade rehearsal, because we did this initial, I just put 12th of June over there because I like the number, because June 6, 12, so 12 divided by 6 is 2, all even, perfectly symmetrical. Sorry. So in addition to this, what will happen then is the 12th of June, we initialize the database. We did all this config and we've moved things across, but we're still dealing with 12th of June dates on the production instance. We don't have that new delta. And we need to actually practice and rehearse and ensure that when we get that data into the production instance, we don't make any mistakes, don't leave anything out. And that's why we have this rehearsal. Some customers that we've seen in highly complex environments may have multiple rehearsals, sometimes up to 3, 4. Hopefully, we get minimal and we get everything right the first time. But there's a lot of hoping, praying, living on a prayer. I'm not going to do karaoke. And then effectively, what will happen is once we get this rehearsal right and we're confident enough, we'll then go and push everything across. Downtime begins. So the day that we decide that we're going to start moving the final sets of data, we block off our users and say to them, all right, guys, Friday evening, everyone, there's the bar, leave us until Monday. In fact, have a really good weekend and come to work really late on Monday. We'll then go and start the migration process. We have to conduct a whole bunch of testing, do a whole bunch of other validations to make sure that the data we've taken, that final delta, adheres to everything. And that whole period is the downtime that we're talking of. And of course, everything goes perfectly well-ish and we redirect the users to our mass environment. Easy peasy. The question then at least is, well, why can't we remove this risk entirely? This whole process is put in place because we expect to fail. So if we were to just remove that, I mean, we don't have to expect to fail. So let's review this in a different paradigm. So hypothetically, we have our users accessing production, as we did before, we do the migration, yada, 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 but we have some kind of thing that does real-time data mapping from our old Maximo environment to our new Maximo environment. So what this would mean is if a technician creates a work order in the production environment that you have today, that work order is automatically synchronized as a transaction to your testing environment. If we can do that, all we then need to do is tell everyone in our workforce, sorry guys, it's tea time now, just go out there for a second, switch this off, reroute the domains, point it to the MAS instance, and then they log into MAS. Sales hat on, okay, so it's very big and obnoxious, please excuse me. We have a tool that does that. Sales hat off, thank you. So in order to do or create this kind of tool, there's a few things that we need to consider and a few things that you should be aware of. So the first is there's a lot of tools that can do live synchronization and ETL between database to database. Those exist, but not all of them are Maximo aware. So that's the first thing. There's specific schema, field types, et cetera, et cetera. Secondly, it needs to also be able to have some very basic this version of a database to that version of a database. But we can also then take that a step further and say, well, what happens if we want to move to DB2 because there's a reduced cost of that as opposed to our SQL? How do we do that live data transaction? So it needs to be able to facilitate that as well. And lastly, what we also want to do, and this was some constant requirements that we have from customers, is we decided to create a bespoke field, but we realized that there's a standard field that works much better. Can we not just do the live transaction and then point the data to the field that we wanted to go to in the first place? Yeah, we can. So there needs to be some layer of configuration around how we can actually move the data to different areas within our new environment. So like I said, this is a tool that we've created. It's called the Cohesive Data Utility. And this is something that's been around for a while, and we've been using it on a number of occasions. And I want to talk to you about one such occasion. So this is one of our customers up in the North Sea. Well, technically, they're all over the world, but they're based in Aberdeen, Standard Drilling. This is one of their big fancy ships. They drill holes, and we extract oil from that, or they prepare that for the extraction itself. On these vessels, they have a teeny-weeny, itsy-bitsy Maximo instance that's put on there. We successfully managed to deploy a single-node OpenShift deployment across 6 of their vessels, all disconnected. So what that means is in the old days, you would have someone do some training where you have to be put in a helicopter, dunk the helicopter in water, flip it upside down, turn it the right way up again and say, "Are you okay, bud?" But we don't have to do that anymore because we can synchronize everything across. So to give a bit more context around what the implementation looked like for Standard Drilling. So as I mentioned, they have 6 Max instances across their rigs, and these rigs are moving 24/7 all around the world. The biggest requirements, at least, is they wanted minutes for their downtime. They could not handle a day. They could not handle hours. They needed something very quick because these vessels are in complete high utilization and optimized for that. They did have a central mass instance that is now running on Cohesive Cloud, but beforehand was running on-prem in their own data center in Aberdeen. And a key thing for this, at least, is they decided to do a technical upgrade because doing 6 mini deployments on remote vessels that are constantly moving, plus migrating an on-premise instance to a cloud instance, may have been a decent amount of work to get done within the period that we did. So a little bit more technical here, just to explain, and there's a slight caveat. We have another solution called the Data Replicator, which is a data replication tool, which allows the vessels to synchronize to an onshore instance whenever they're away from some connectivity. So this works similar to the CDU, except this is a bidirectional process. Different tooling, roughly same outcome. But what you need to understand about this is they'll have, like I mentioned, on each vessel, a itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny Maximo 7.6 instance in a yellow polka dot bikini. They'll have their SQL database CBR, And effectively what happens is any transaction that goes on here, any purchase requisitions will then be synchronized over through to their central instance, and vice versa. All the rules and conflicts are something that you can set up and configure. And the same holds true for all their other vessels. So we could not have performed this upgrade without leveraging the CDU. Now, how this all works. All right, we'll do this. So over here, we have the new world, mass, and on the other side, we have the old world, 7.6. Now, what we had to do first and foremost is we target the onshore data center first. So we do the traditional upgrade, like I've mentioned, where we have 7.6 on the top over there. We have the upgrade path that I've explained previously to get this orange box on the left-hand side. Once we've established the orange box, we then sent, using the old CDR network, a little package, a remote deploy script with everything to configure the OpenShift cluster, everything to do the installation, and all that the operators needed to do there was wait for it to download onto their vessel, and we made a cute little user interface that said, what vessel number are you? Hit 2, press enter, and the deployment process begun. So we did that. Once that deployment process initiates, we'll then have our mass cluster set up with all the requisite transfers across as well. And then what ends up happening is that final delta gets synchronized back through the main cohesive cloud or their main mass instance back to all the vessels. So it's kind of like you're taking the vessel, synchronizing it to onshore, upgrading onshore, and then synchronizing that upgraded version back to the vessel itself. So all of this was an interplay. And then we did that 6 more times with the rest of the vessels as well. So this was a very challenging and very successful project. We won the award at Maximo World. Look at all the happy bosses. Maybe I should ask for, okay, no, my boss is here, I can't really say that. But if any of you can say upgrade or upgrade salary-wise, you can point it in that direction. Appreciate it. So the gist of the matter here, at least, is by leveraging the CDU, we can use or apply smarter continuous employment, continuous integration, continuous deployment methodologies to allow our upgrades to take place a lot more efficient and a lot faster. OpenShift as well is an interesting beast, and we've been talking a lot to a lot of you over here at the conference. It is a bit of a daunting thing to begin with, but there's a lot of automation, a lot of value that you can get from it. From an operational perspective, it might be difficult to justify that if you're trying to convince IT to facilitate that. If you're in the IT organization, it is something that does have a lot of automation that you can deploy upon it. So something to consider as well. So with that, I'll lead over to any questions and answers. Wanted to have a little bit more time for this. So I'll maybe open up to the floor. You can ask me how my day is.
I'll run over with a microphone.
Or any Maximo system.
So the question was, can the CDU be used to map some other ERP to MAS?
Yep.
The answer is it can. The value that we bring with it is that we have those data mappings from 7.6 to all the various versions of MAS 8 through to 9 as well. So if we do that, we would have to redeploy those data mappings, and that might not necessarily be the most feasible way to do it. But if the requirement is that zero downtime that you're looking at, we definitely can do that as well.
Thank you.
Another example of where we've deployed this in the US was, I don't know if I can say the name, one of the power companies. And when we're talking about downtime, their previous upgrade, I think they were offline for maybe about 3 days when they did that. When we used the CDU to go to MAS, and the previous upgrade was like a early version of 7.2, 7.6.1.3, I think. And when we did the final upgrade to MAS, they had 5 minutes of downtime. That was it. We've seen this again. Usually the biggest things that cause an increase in downtime might be like networking issues or some coordination with some other infrastructure team. It can also sometimes be how large it is to synchronize. So if you let that delta between the initial load and the latest piece of data to come across take a lot longer, then that does obviously determine how long the CDU will take to synchronize those transactions through. But any of the transactions that you can facilitate or create within Maximo can be synchronized across as well. Another thing, like I mentioned before, where we've used this quite repeatedly is to transfer between those DB2 to SQL, Oracle to SQL, Oracle to DB2, et cetera, et cetera. And it does really have a lot of efficiencies in terms of that.
Cool. Any other quick questions?
So how this delta process really works, like when you look at transactional objects, right? And you did the initial load, and you get the data to maximum mass, and then you get the delta load on top of that, and when you have the transaction object work orders or wherever the statuses are involved, and the status progressed in the life cycle. So how the delta process makes sure that all the history retains when you get the delta in.
So remember, the CDU will only do the replication from an existing target from the source to the target. So whatever's in the source will be in the target. The replicate that I spoke of will facilitate the transactions between the two, because you won't necessarily, excuse me, the purpose there is to, sorry, I'm very touched by your question. The purpose there is not to be able to facilitate multiple transactions. The purpose is to be able to make sure that the source system is replicated into the target system. So whatever history is existing in the source system will take place in the target as well.
Thank you.
Correct. Cool. I've been told that as an extrovert, I need to wait 7 seconds of silence. So I'm going to watch for 7 seconds. It's going to be painful for the other extroverts in the room.
I've got a quick one. We talked a lot about the journey of the migration, but we didn't talk about getting started. How do you go about doing that?
Perfect. So like I mentioned in some of the previous, let's see if we can flip all the way back to here. There's all those various processes that take place. And a lot of the times, not just with the cutover planning itself, but when we start to look at things like the data quality improvements and reducing Java customisations, the biggest impact with that is also the affected data, your integrations, etc. So with CDU, we basically just try and resolve a lot of those conflicts because we don't have to worry about complex transformations and complex changes and all those types of things. And a lot of the times, because it's database to database, some of the impacts of moving data can be reduced with that. So for us, it's a case of it's one less thing that you need to be concerned about on the actual upgrade. And we can really start getting into grips with trying to really find the value in this earlier portion over here. Because the biggest problem that we've seen with customers with upgrading is if the Maximo owner is the operations team, the engineering team, the guys and gals with the spinners doing the work, often it's very difficult to motivate why should we upgrade to Mass in the first place. Because you need to motivate that to either corporate IT or some other IT aspect. And similarly, if you're in IT and you're the owner of the Maximo system, you need to be able to justify a suitable return on investment to do that. And so the more savings we can get by automating as many of these sort of below the line, like things that just cost extra, that weigh you down, the more we can start thinking about the value that MAS can bring. Because I think that's the biggest problem, is that you get bogged down in the details of, we don't have OpenShift, what's the cheapest cloud, how do we do this, it's so much more expensive, WebSphere versus Kafka, how's this all going to work together? That's things that you don't necessarily need to worry about, and there's ways that we can simplify and reduce that. What we really need to start focusing on is, are you using some basic condition monitoring? Are you leveraging reliability strategies as an example? Would you consider using health? And if you want to use asset health, have you started your journey at the moment to create or capture the requisite data so that when you go over to MAS, that you can plug and play, as nice as we'd like to think that's the case, but there's some preparation that you can do in your current 7.6 environment that you can immediately get tangible benefit for, but will start to lay the groundwork for future value as you progress into the suite itself. So our main progression is, let's all the nitty-gritty techie stuff that really doesn't necessarily, unless you're dealing with the broader OpenShift capabilities, add a lot of value. Let's remove that and try to find how we can automate and reduce the cost of that so that we can start talking about the value parts of it and have more proactive discussions around that.
Awesome. Any other?
Sorry, we got two over there. He's going to come with a mic.
Good morning. I'm Alj from the Philippines. Okay, so my question is that from the previous slide, I've seen that it's more on the technical preparation. So I'm just interested to know, how did you implement the proper change management with regards to the mass upgrade? Because, you know, like the awareness, the ADCAR portion of the proper management, change management, like the awareness, knowledge transfer, and I think the proper change management is not just about the advisory, since, for example, I'm thinking that the ships or the vessels, the technicians are all a little bit maybe old or seasoned employees, so maybe they're not techy enough to know the, to know the mass functionalities, like the buttons are relocated somewhere, something like that. So I'm just interested to know, how did you implement the proper change management aside from the technical requirements? Thank you.
Okay, a very good question. So short answer in the true consulting way is it depends. And why I say that is some of our customers are quite inept at facilitating change management independently. So Stena Drilling themselves, they wanted us, we've been working with them for quite some time, so we understand how each other work, we understand their capabilities on their end. With them, there's also an added nuance of, so we have sort of ProSci accredited change managers, is what we call them, and to get them on the vessels, you do have to do a whole bunch of training where, like I said, you put you in a helicopter, you flip it upside down, you dunk it in water. That's true. And so it's a little bit costly to do that with a bunch of change managers. And getting the staff rotation is a little bit more complex. So in this particular use case, they were the ones who independently went and facilitated that change management. We supported them in that respect. But typically when we're doing, in that previous slide where we focused on those different stage gates, this is really the initial discussion point to prepare and understand what are the levers that you have to play with for your upgrade itself. We're not necessarily talking about the full-on implementation of it. This is just what we termed at the stage, readiness assessment, for how best should you go and do that. For other customers, as an example, some of our rail customers that we worked with, we also offer a bit more hand-holding, where we would do sort of similar to an ISO 55000 assessment. So those who don't know, ISO 55000 is the asset management system, effectively a framework you can use to assess how competent you are in this framework. And in that, there's also some components of it. So we would typically go with this leading ISO capability or framework and then be able to identify both operationally what's happening as well as more on the tangent or tacitful human level to dictate what change management needs to occur. But we're very focused on how that still impacts the broader asset management system. And we also supply, like we've aligned with ProSci as the change management process, and we'll implement that throughout our project planning phases as well. So it depends. We can give you more examples of very specific customers if you'd like to come past. There was another question, gentleman back there.
Yeah, so you said about getting more value out of OpenShift. So do you have any examples out of that? And the other question is, how much is your average downtime using a traditional Maximo upgrade versus like CDU?
So I can answer the second question first. We avoid using the traditional approach. In all of our upgrades, we try and mandate as far as possible to use the CDU because it reduces not only, the principle here isn't to necessarily reduce the downtime, but to reduce the risk. Because this is what we're saying, if you've done your rehearsals correctly, if you've done all those things correctly, yes, you can still do it, but you're adding time. But if everything goes well, then that's good. But if something doesn't go well, CDU can at least reduce that completely. So from a comparison perspective, we mainly ask customers, what did they do previously? Maybe they've implemented or did the upgrade themselves, and we can benchmark around that. CDU typically would be anywhere, and again, like I said, depending on how much it needs to synchronize across, and at the same time, if there's infrastructure challenges that just, it's not fast enough, the infrastructure, the intranet, or whatever it might be, we really do look at maybe hours, at most 2 minutes in certain instances, as opposed to days. There hasn't been, to my knowledge, one that extends beyond that. Yeah. Then onto the value of OpenShift, specifically, and without getting too technical about it, automations. So a story during one of the upgrade processes, I think it was like a pre-prod environment, I was talking to our technical team about this. If you were having a traditional 7.6 JVM approach, the JVM just fell flat, dead. With OpenShift, it fell flat and it just automatically recreated itself. Users didn't know any better. We were freaking out, but everyone else was perfectly okay. UAT went completely smoothly. So there's a lot of resilience that OpenShift does bring. This is why it's this equivalent. If any of you were around from version, I think it was 4 to 5, this is the leap in technology equivalent of that. And so it is going to provide a lot of dividends down the line. It's just we're at this point where it's still a little bit abrasive in terms of the cost perspective. Hopefully that helps. And I think there was a gentleman over there that had his hand up as well.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My question is around data structures. And did you encounter any issues towards data? Because one of the challenges we have is our data model underneath is very ancient, and we want to fix that at some point and go towards industry best practice. This is Indy from Sydney Water. Thank you.
Thank you. So, like I've mentioned with Stena, we've been working with them for a while, and they already had a lot of that sorted out. Some of the other water customers that I work with in the UK specifically, they have similar issues, especially sometimes matching below ground, above ground. And now where we're trying to link the operational assets to OT sensors, the data nomenclature is just all over the show. And typically what we do, like I mentioned that bigger diagram, that business review tries to identify, it's a big net that catches a lot of things. One of the things that it tries to target is the data hierarchy. So, for example, some of the T&D, transmission distribution, as well as generation customers, we might suggest that they go with KKS, RDS, renewables as well. There's the different versions there. There's also the ISO 19264. I might get that one wrong. So in terms of aligning two data standards, that's something that we would typically do as a planning stage beforehand. And then it's decided whether or not we want to include that in the upgrade. But again, it needs to justify the business value accordingly. So what we have seen in terms of enablement of, let's say, health down the line is having those data structures set up in the correct way, in a standardized way, simple yet good enough. And by good enough, I don't mean loose. I mean as in appropriate for what you need to achieve. It can enable, like I mentioned, health and certain things that you can do and monitor later on. So the data structure is important, but it also depends. Some of our customers, IT is incredibly demanding around staying compliant within the end of support period. So some of them we've had to just literally lift and shift because it was mandated that we have to remain compliant. So it's, again, depending on the business driver specifically. But we would plan for that ahead of the upgrade. During the upgrade with the CDU, like I mentioned, we're just taking and pointing. If we want to do something fancy in between, we can, but that adds additional complexity and testing for your end users as well. So if you have capacity to do that, yes, but the usual advice we give is, like, let's get through the upgrade first, and then we can do that. Or if it's a case of we have to do this, it's planned for due diligently ahead of time. Perfect. No one fell asleep. That's impressive. I really appreciate it. There's some definite caffeine in the water. I think we've got 5 minutes left, but if there's any other questions, I think I might exit stage left, sorry. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll be over at the Cohesive booth, and hopefully I can inform you there as well. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone.